morning, good afternoon, everyone. I think we can start. It's 2 p.m. Geneva time. Welcome to the webinar. I'm very pleased to meet you all, and I hope you and your beloved ones stay safe and healthy. I would like to thank you, the experts, for expressing interest to contribute to the drafting of the monitoring guidance and joining us for today's discussion. As you know, the third meeting of the Conference of the Parties in 2019 mandated the Secretariat to advance the work on monitoring guidance, and we are delighted to have 3 colleagues with excellent expertise helping us with this task in the Secretariat. These colleagues are Mr. Garth Martin, Mr. Dave Evers, and Mr. Neil Basu. In addition, the plan has been to seek input from a wide range of experts and scientists, as there's already a lot of expertise on Mercury monitoring available around the world, and we would like to draw from it. My colleague Eisaku Toda will explain the process that has led us to this point in time in a minute, and from my side, I would only like to highlight that the aim is to ensure the guidance can represent scientifically sound approaches. And I'm confident that with the strong consultants team we have and your expert contribution, we will be able to achieve that. The first effectiveness evaluation of the convention is to be done by 2023. Article 22 of the convention describes the effectiveness evaluation. According to that article, it will include information on the level of implementation based on reporting by parties on the measures taken and effectiveness of such measures, and this reporting is due by the end of 2021. It will also include comparable monitoring data on mercury levels in the environment and vulnerable human populations. This is the component we are focusing on during our webinar. And it will also include other available scientific, environmental, technical, financial, and economic information, such as reports of the Compliance and Implementation Committee and information on the operation of the financial assistance, technology transfer, and capacity building arrangements. The agreed purpose of the evaluation has been defined as assessing the overall effectiveness of the convention at the global level, based on the objective of the Minamata Convention, which is to protect the human health and the environment from emissions and releases of anthropogenic mercury. As decided by the COP in 2019, the work on the first effectiveness evaluation has started with development of monitoring guidance to maintain harmonized, comparable information on mercury levels in the environment, and of a second report on mercury trade, supply and demand, including mercury waste flows and stocks. The work is also ongoing on developing indicators for the first effectiveness evaluation, which will be briefly presented to you by my colleague Claudia. It can be foreseen that COP4, which will take place on 1st, 5th November 2021 in Bali, Indonesia, will take additional decisions in order to fully establish the necessary arrangements and processes for the first effectiveness evaluation. I would like to note that Article 22 about the effectiveness evaluation is not the only one which includes provisions on monitoring. There is also Article 19 on research, development and monitoring, which requires parties to endeavor to cooperate to develop and improve mercury data inventories, modeling, geographically representative monitoring and assessment. This article also includes provisions on collaboration in the collection and exchange of relevant and appropriate samples and harmonization of methodologies for all these activities. And while Article 22 foresees the use of comparable monitoring data for the specific purpose of the effectiveness evaluation of the convention at the global level, Article 19 provides broad opportunities for cooperation among parties on those mentioned issues to support implementation of the convention. I will stop my introduction here, and I would like to thank you in advance for your engagement in this important work. I will stay with you for the session, but now over to you, Eisaku. Thank you.
Thank you, Monika. And I'd like to, before starting the meeting, I would like to follow up on some further explanation about the, the nature of this meeting and what to expect from this meeting. As you see in this slide, this is the first event of the Minamata Online Season 1, um, which is a series of online sessions convened by the Minamata Secretariat. And we built on our experience in online events, including information sessions and monitoring guidance that we held on the 10th of June. And if you can go to the next slide, please. This meeting is also a part of the intersessional process for establishing the framework to evaluate the effectiveness of the convention pursuant to Article 22 at uh, 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 at, COP4 to be held in November 2021. Uh, this name you see on the screen, first webinar of the expert contributing to the monitoring guidance for effectiveness evaluation. This is what this meeting is about. Um, uh, as Monika said, Article 22 states that the effectiveness evaluation shall be conducted on the basis of available scientific information, including comparable monitoring data on the presence and movement of mercury in the environment and trends in levels of mercury observed in biotic media and vulnerable populations. COP3 requested the Secretariat to work on the drafting of guidance on monitoring to maintain harmonized, comparable information on mercury levels in the environment. In order to do this, your names have been provided to the Secretariat from parties and stakeholders to contribute to the drafting of this guidance. So this is a kind of kickoff first webinar for you, the experts, identify the parties, stakeholders to contribute to the drafting of the guidance. Next slide, please. Yes. I'm going to explain to you the agenda of this today's meeting, which is in front of you and which has already been circulated to you in advance. Um, we are at item 1, opening, and we will further explain the background on the work on monitoring guidance a bit further. Then at agenda item 2, we are going to introduce the draft annotated outline of the guidance with the help of Will, Dave, Neil, and of course, myself will explain the draft annotated outline of the monitoring guidance. This outline will be the basis for further drafting to be done by the consultants and the Secretariat with your input. Item 3 will be an interactive session. Written comments on the annotated outline have been compiled and circulated to you already. We would like to hear your comments on the annotated line if your views were not included in the written submissions. And then we will go into some specific discussion on specific elements in each chapter of the annotated outline. When we open up for discussion, if you would like to take the floor, please raise hands using the button which you find at on the bottom right of the participant list. And also, I think you understand where the chat box is, and you can put your comments or questions in the chat box, and if so that we can pick up some questions and respond. Item 4 is a summing up of what has been discussed, and we find out the best next step for the work. And Also, I'd like to mention that this meeting is recorded, and the recording will be made available on the website. Of course, the video of the from the participant side will not be included, but we think that the video of the panelists will be included in the recording. So then we will continue with the opening, and I would like to explain a bit further the background of this work. And the next slide is reproduces the decision of COP3 MC3/10 on effectiveness evaluation, and I'm referring to point 2A, in which the conference of parties requested the Secretariat to advance the work by securing services for drafting, guidance and monitoring to maintain harmonized comparable information on mercury levels in the environment, taking into consideration the draft structure set out a note on the background information on mercury monitoring. So this is the basis of this work, but now I'm going to turn to my colleague Claudia to mention other aspects of the intersessional work on the effectiveness evaluation. Claudia.
Thank you very much, Eisaku, and good day to everybody, and thank you for joining us. I will not take much of your time. The item I just want to speak to very shortly is just the accompanying work that we are supporting parties with regard to the effectiveness evaluation. So while today is about monitoring guidance, in other words, as Eisaku said, 2.A, I'd just like to draw your attention also to the first paragraph in that decision, which invites parties to submit views on the indicators that were laid out in the first annex to that decision. And this is indeed work that is also going in parallel to this work. If I may just have the next slide. We will look in detail in that set of work on this Thursday. So we'd like everybody who can and who's interested, please to register for one of whichever session works better for your time zone. And this is going to be the first of a three-part or three-step approach to support parties in terms of their views on the indicators. The indicators that are in Annex A of that decision and the decision text in particular asks for views. And so on Thursday will be the information to put everybody on the same level of understanding of what is in front of them in this intersessional process and the indicators that will be looked at. And to inform of the next steps, the second step would be that parties and others are invited to give initial views on the indicators. We will then prepare a workspace where all can access and have a look at the initial views. And based on that, we are then going to be supporting and inviting parties to send us the actual views they would like to put forward to the COP for its consideration and deliberations with regard to the indicators at COP4. So there's a number of areas of work over the next months that we will be supporting you on. So do join us on Thursday to know a lot more about that. The following slide, just in case you would like to see, is just what it looks like. If I may have the following slide. That's it. Thank you very much. So Annex 1 to that decision lays out the proposed indicators. There are about 60 odd indicators that COP3 attached to this decision. So it would be the task to go through those indicators and prepare views on that. But with that, let me take you back to Eisaku. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claudia. Now I'm coming back to the work on the monitoring guidance, and the slide you're seeing on the screen is the roadmap that the Secretariat developed in May this year. So we are we are already 4 or 5 months through in this work stream, and this first slide explains the steps until August this year, and this sorry you so sorry this is the this is the slide as mentioning. um, uh, in this roadmap, there are three color scheme. The orange shows the steps for the development of an annotated outline, and the blue one, the blue boxes speak to the drawing on scientific expertise to create the content of the monitoring guidance, and the coming up with the first draft. And then the next slide will include the green boxes, which is about the consultation with parties and stakeholders. If you can go back to the first one, please. The I'm so the orange this one is until August. So these most of these are already done. But I'd like to explain what happened. The if you look at May 30, the Secretary developed a draft annotated outline and put up for comments. And the comments were invited until the 31st of July. And the original plan was that the Secretariat will finalize the annotated outline and post it on the website on by 15th of August. But this has not happened, partly because there are some late comments, but we wanted to make it certain that the sufficient views have been expressed by parties and stakeholders. And in our mailbox, we received another comment today. So we thought that it would be we would need a bit of more time to finalize the annotated outline. So the orange box has not been completed yet, but will be completed soon. The next slide is from the work from now on, and the early September has the first webinar of the identified experts and scientists, which is this one, and it is expected that the consultants and the Secretariat will develop elements of guidance through thematic online meetings of identified experts and scientists. So as I said earlier, this is a kickoff meeting, and we expect that we go into a specific discussion by convening thematic online meetings. And the green thing explains the process for consultation after the Secretariat post draft guidance in early January. So this is, sorry, the next slide, please. So the next slide is about how we're going to develop the draft guidance, we as in line with the roadmap, we hired 3 consultants, Mr. Garth Martin, Mr. Dave Evers, and Mr. Basu, for doing air monitoring, biota monitoring, and human biomonitoring. And they will speak to the outline at the next agenda item. And the Secretariat will draft the introductory and the other general part of the document and coordinate these elements into a draft guidance document. In order to seek input from a wide range of experts and scientists, the Secretariat issued a call for interest to contribute to the drafting of the guidance by the 15th of August, and we receive your name so far, and we convened this first meeting. 34 experts identified by 16 parties, 3 experts from 2 non-party governments, and 15 experts from stakeholders. A list is available on the convention website, and you have also received the Excel sheet with the email account. So I think this is it. This is my introduction to the work of this group or with this workflow, and I like to see whether there's any question. So if you have any burning question, please raise your hand or put any message to the mailbox. And of course, you can raise some questions after hearing the annotated outline. I see no hand, and I see no question in the chat box. So I think we can move on. Okay, then please go to the next slide, which is agenda item 2, introduction to the draft and the outline. And next one, please. So as I explained on the COP decision, COP requested to draft monitoring guidance, taking into consideration the draft structure set out in the information document submitted to COP3, which is reproduced in this slide, consisting of 12 sections. And we looked at this and we slightly reorganized the elements and came up with the draft annotated outline that we are going to look at today. Next slide, please. This the 4 chapters. The 4 first chapters are the general issues. So I'm going to speak to it. The first one, acknowledgement. The second chapter, list of abbreviations, which are quite simple. The substantive part will start at chapter 3, introduction and objectives. And this will introduce explain the objectives of the document, which is to support the arrangements for providing with comparable monitoring data for the effectiveness evaluation. And the introductory part will explain the structure of the document. The chapter 4 is about the use of comparable monitoring data for the effectiveness evaluation. As stated in the convention text, this is the monitoring is about the level of mercury in the environment, biotic media, and vulnerable populations. And this is for the purpose of the effectiveness evaluation. Therefore, this section will explain the selected media for monitoring, which are air, biota, and humans. And this is based on the discussion at the expert group that submitted their report to COP3. And this chapter will discuss how the data can be aggregated to understand the overall level of mercury, geographical patterns, temporal trends, and environmental and health risk. So, and the chapter 5, 6, and 7 are media specific. So now I would like to invite experts on the specific media monitoring to explain on the possible contents of the monitoring guidance. For air monitoring, we like to turn to Bill Martin, who is going to work on the chapter 5. Bill, you can please take the floor.
Okay, thank you, Eisaku. Good evening to people from the East, afternoon, those in Europe, and good morning to people from North America and South America. First of all, I would just like to commend the experts group, the ad hoc group members who are also joining us on this session for the work that they've done so far. And it's a bit unfortunate that what they hoped for didn't materialize at COP3. But with that said, I'm just quickly going to give you an overview of the air monitoring chapter for which I will be responsible for. And Eisaku has mentioned that we've got 5 minutes, so I will be very brief, as I believe there is a lot of discussions and input that we want from your side as members that has been nominated by their countries and parties. So under point number 1, mercury monitoring air, the rationale, what was decided on was that we'll have a look at total gaseous mercury and also gaseous elemental mercury, as well as wet deposition of mercury. And I think for this part, it's important for us that operates in the space that we know the importance of monitoring mercury in air. But I think for this section, it's also important that we highlight why we want to monitor mercury in air as an introduction, and also give just a quick link from the atmosphere into the other medias, and that will also be part of this guidance document, say for Biota, the link between Biota, the water bodies, etc., etc. And I think there is enough literature available that can back up the reasons why air should be chosen as one of the media or matrices for the effectiveness evaluation. If we look at point number 2, considering of monitoring sites, the sites needs to be representative, influence of local emissions, description of sites, and make use of existing monitoring networks. If I look at the decision COP MC 10/2, in one of the criteria is that the effectiveness evaluation should be on a global level. If you can just quickly show that picture on the next slide. This picture just currently shows all the mercury monitoring sites that was taken from the global mercury assessment. And the picture on the left-hand side shows all the mercury monitoring site, be it now in air, be it water, whatsoever, be it passive samplers, whatever. But if you look at what is expected from us on a global level, then a lot of those sites that's currently there doesn't meet the criteria. And if you look at the picture on the right-hand side and on the bottom left-hand side, so this is more what the picture supposed to look like when you look at in terms of if you want to have a global coverage or a global picture of what is going on. And therefore, it's important that the site criteria must be specific. And if you look at the WHO and what they do with the GAW sites, the global atmospheric white sites, the criteria that they use for a global site, so they've got global sites, they've got regional sites, and they've got contributing sites. And each of these sites have a different criteria. And I think it's important that this criteria be stipulated very clearly if we want to also meet the criteria that we want to see the effect on a global level. So there is guidance available. Another organization is ICOS that's also got clearly stipulated criteria as to where certain sites can be placed to get an overall global picture. And I think that is the important thing, is that we want a global picture of mercury monitoring. Okay, next slide. Then in terms of sampling and measurements, we can divide it, as you see there, continuous measurements, active measurements, and passive sampling. And I think in this section, we can expand on the continuous measurements, basically focus more on your equipment that is currently available, equipment that can detect mercury with either cold vapor fluorescence spectroscopy or atomic absorption spectroscopy. And then also active sampling, which I refer to rather as manual sampling. It is also one of the methods that can be used and that will be discussed in this chapter, where you basically have a more simpler method from your continuous instrument. We just got a pump and a gold trap or some absorbent, and you have got air that moves through it, and it basically gets trapped on that trap, and eventually it gets analyzed in a laboratory where standard methods and accredited methods are available for this type. The idea process will obviously be to have instruments that is commercially available, but we basically have to look at all the instruments or all the techniques that we can use to monitor mercury in air. Another way of sampling and measurements is to use passive samplers. And there's also some commercially available passive samplers available. There's a lot of studies that has been done and reports that can show that these passive samplers are good in quality and then can also be used, and that then that they are available commercially, so they can be compared with instruments and other passive samples that is available. Yeah, so that was that. Then you look at quickly at wet deposition. That's also another way of sampling the measurements, and there are methods available. There are networks in the US, in Europe, in Asia that use rain collectors that are also commercially available. A lot of intercomparison studies has been done between the different rain collectors. So that is also another option. In terms of point number 4, quality assurance. There's a lot of SOPs and QA and KO and CO procedures available that can be used and which will also be highlighted in this chapter. In terms of data additional data that is available, I think the basic that you basically need is your metadata, your wind speed, wind direction, humidity, rain, especially for weather position, you need that. And then depending on where these monitoring sites are located, if it's located at existing sites in countries where air quality measurements are made, or as part of a global atmosphere watch station, then other auxiliary data and greenhouse data will also be available, which will just be more beneficial. In terms of data management, that will definitely come up, and it's important that the data be available for everybody to be used, but I think that is definitely a decision that will definitely come in, but this will also be discussed. And then in terms of point number seven, statistical consideration, I think with all the data that will be available, there's some interesting graphs and trends and spatial graphs that can be constructed by making use of modeling and some other techniques. But just as a quick overview, I think in terms of using air as a media, it's definitely a sound approach, and there's enough literature available to support the recommendation by the ATO group that air should be used as one of the media for the effectiveness evaluation. Thank you, Eisaku.
Thank you, Linville. And I think we will open for questions after presenting all the chapters. So I'd like to turn to David to present chapter 6.
Okay, very good, Eisaku. Thank you. And hello to everyone around the world from the different time zones. It's good to start this project off together. So I'm going to discuss and present about monitoring mercury and biota. And I have a similar sort of suite of 7 elements to cover, just like Linwell did. And Tak, if you can go to the next slide. And if you can go to the beginning of that slideshow, yeah. So this just kind of takes that same annotated outline and just reworks it a little bit. I'll talk about today about what organisms and tissue types, where are the monitoring sites and data gaps, and I'll focus on number 1 and 2. What are the sampling designs and measurement methods? Number 4, how are data collected and managed, and how are data analyzed and interpreted? And that last piece will really depend on the objectives. There's various objectives that we'll all have when we examine the mercury data, and that can relate to spatial temporal trends, and is it human or eco-health related. A lot of what I'll present does come from this UNEP report. It was an IMS document from COP3. So next slide. Next. We're fortunate for Biota that there are a lot of data that are published in the peer-reviewed literature. And this map represents a database called the Global Biotic Mercury Synthesis, or GBIMS. It reflects over 1,200 references, over 1 million samples around the world, and represents over 3,000 locations. Again, all this information is published in the peer-reviewed literature, and it's a good starting point to start to get an idea of how the different taxa are distributed around the world and what their concentrations are like. So simply, there's different symbols that represent the taxa that are in Article 19. We should remember that Article 19 only includes fish, sea turtles, birds, and marine mammals as our 4 taxa groups. There's 5 symbols here. I just split out Lazabranchs, which are sharks and rays, and then teleos fish. Also, you can see there's different color codes, yellow, orange, and red. Red means the highest concentrations, yellow is the lowest concentration. So we can start to see a little bit of the geographic patterns, and we have an idea of, again, how mercury is represented in the different taxa groups. Next slide, Tak. What's really important for us to understand and select the right indicators based on existing data is to select organisms that are in a trophic level that's high enough to show the greatest risk. And sometimes the greatest risk isn't something we want to know for an objective, such as time trends. Lower trophic level organisms might be more helpful, but generally trophic level 4 or above are the trophic levels that we'll want to look at as somewhat are indicators for what could be the worst case scenarios for human health or eco health, and something we may want to look at from a spatial gradient standpoint. So trophic level is very important, and it is information that is generally available in a quantitative way for most organisms. Next slide. And so we could start to understand the different organisms around the world with all the data we have, knowing we want trophic level 4 generally. And this information can be broken down by terrestrial biomes and then associated aquatic ecosystems. 4 terrestrial biomes could be Arctic, boreal forest and taiga, temperate broadleaf and mixed forests, and then tropical rainforests, and there's associated ocean basins with those terrestrial systems. And then we can understand what are the human and or the ecological health bioindicators, and we can split that up by freshwater fish, birds, sea turtles, and marine mammals. So this is just an example of some of the organisms that could be selected around the world, and they will differ by species, but we could understand that from a trophic level standpoint, we can choose trophic level 4 as kind of our broad indicator that could be comparable and can be comparable around the world. Next slide. So from the IMS document that I showed on the first slide, the UNEP report, there was a effort to start to propose how we could examine mercury and biota around the world. And one proposed approach is to have 2 frameworks. The one overarching framework would be monitor mercury at a continental level. And these are the 3 steps that were identified. Step 1 is to map out ecosystem sensitivity. I have a slide about that. Step 2 is to identify some of these point sources, such as ASGM, and areas that are important for aquatic-based animal foods for human health purposes, and then identify greatest overlap with endangered species or rare species that are red listed. Step 3 is to finally choose sites that would reflect step 1 and step 2. Next slide. I think there's some question about ecosystem sensitivity, what that means, or biological mercury hotspots. In red here are features that increase sensitivity of mercury input in a system, that in the middle can methylate mercury through wetlands, organic matter, acidity, just new mercury inputs. And then in the third panel, there's food web transfer. So food chain length and pelagic food webs are important for increasing sensitivity. There are different ways to look at, let's say, GIS levels for decreasing sensitivity, and then some factors that just increase or decrease sensitivity. So these sensitivity spots or biological mercury hotspots need to be incorporated in how we look at mercury over time and space in biota. Next slide. The second framework would be an ocean framework. The steps are similar. There's 3 steps, but they do differ in identifying distinctions among the ocean basins of interest using FAO, commercial fisheries data. This is for step 1. Step 2, start to identify the organisms such as trophic level 4 or 5, organisms such as tuna and billfish. And then step 3 would be to select focal trophic level 4 higher species per ocean basin, and then conduct a power analysis to get a better idea of the sample sizes that we would need. Next slide. And proposed, and again in the report, the UNEP report, the IMF document, this is just one potential approach to go through that exercise of trying to understand where are the existing data, which are in green, mostly North America and Europe, that cover most of what we need for a global effort, whereas the areas that are in red have less than 10% coverage and are the areas where there's the biggest data gaps, such as Central America and the Caribbean, Africa, and the Indo-Pacific area. In orange, there's half, orange, there's 20% coverage in South America. And then in Asia, maybe up to 50% coverage, or just shy of 50%. These same color schemes can be taken by the ocean basins. So you can see in the Mediterranean and the Arctic, there's good coverage. In the South Atlantic and the Pacific, there's poor coverage, and there's in-between coverage from the Indian Ocean. Next slide. So that covers it highlights some approaches for number 1 and 2. The rest of the interests and needs, I'm just going to briefly cover here. Sampling and lab measurements, data collection, management, interpretation. There's a lot there to deal with. I wanted to focus in a little bit on data collection and management. There's existing initiatives that the convention could benefit from. I'll mention AMAP, or the Arctic Monitoring Assessment Program. It's the best example of field sampling and tissue measurements, data collection, management, interpretation at a biome level. So it's a great example for all of us to use and see if we can use that template for other biomes around the world. The Global Observation System for Mercury, or GOS4M, it's part of the Global Earth Observation System of Systems, or GEOS, is a great example of collections of global data sets that will be very valuable for how we move forward. And then there's a new initiative by Jeff Stapp. The overall goal by this new initiative is to create a global web-based interactive Mercury platform of harmonizing comparable data. So there are examples that are in place or will be in place soon that the convention could benefit from. And I think that's all I have.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. I'll start my video. So as I said, we will take some questions after presenting the whole chapters. So now I'm turning to Neil to present the next chapter. Neil, please. You're muted. I think you can unmute yourself.
Great, you can hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Wonderful. Hello, everyone. I'm going to review the human biomonitoring chapter for this report. And I think we can all agree that in the last decade or so, there's been tremendous efforts in terms of bringing together global understanding of how to do human biomonitoring, but also to implement and execute upon this. So there are a number of national human biomonitoring efforts that we can draw upon, as well as very comprehensive research studies in which large populations have been examined. Coupled with that, the World Health Organization has put out really good guidance documents on how to identify populations at risk from mercury exposure, which includes detailed SOPs and guidance on how to do human biomonitoring. And then 2 years ago, many of us were involved with the UN Global Mercury Assessment, in which we finally had a human focused chapter. And within that, we provided a lot of guidance on how to go about and do human biomonitoring. So there's a fair bit of information to work from which we can tackle the 6 points listed on the screen here. I think the most important thing to realize when dealing with human populations is that we need to respect their rights, and that there are tremendous ethical considerations that go into doing this type of work. It's not so difficult, but nonetheless, ethics certificates are required. For those of us in research environments, we have IRBs or REBs that have worldwide accreditation that allow us to do human ethics research as long as proper protocols are followed. And for those not in these comprehensive research institutes, there are other ways to obtain ethical approvals. So what we'll do for sure is to provide guidance for all stakeholders on how you can go about and get ethical approval for your work. Next, the chapter will talk about how to do human biomonitoring. And again, I refer to a number of really good documents published in recent years that provide tremendous details on both technical aspects and practical aspects of doing human biomonitoring. And as I've told many people over the years, I really feel that we're lucky for Mercury in that the human biomonitoring is relatively straightforward, simple, well understood, and cost effective. So there are biomarkers we can use to gauge human exposures to mercury, so hair, blood, and urine. These are relatively non-invasive. They tell us different yet mutually reinforcing things. We have great analytical laboratory processes that can measure mercury in these. Reference standards and SOPs are abundant, and these all of us give us a good confidence that the data quality is strong. When coupled with survey instruments, we can then use the information either in hair, blood, or in urine to probe deeper into what the sources of mercury may be. Taken together, we need to realize that there are different populations that we can target. There are background populations that may be exposed to relatively low levels of organic and inorganic mercury, but there are also vulnerable populations that we need to think about when we put together this chapter. So on one end of the spectrum, we have populations exposed to high levels of elemental and organic mercury. These might be the ASGM workers or those in certain industrial facilities, in dental facilities. And on the other hand, we have populations that might be exposed to high levels of methyl mercury, principally through the consumption of fish. So we can then design a biomonitoring program that looks at specific biomarkers coupled with surveys to then pinpoint better and increase our understanding of what exposures are. So in terms of developing survey protocols, again, we can rely strongly upon some of the documents I referred to earlier. And then moving forward into data management, analysis, and evaluation. This touches upon what Linwell and Dave mentioned. It's really context dependent, but nonetheless, there are a lot of ways in which the human biomonitoring data can be sliced and diced, but also interpreted. We have relatively good guidance values available by which judgments can be made. And then in terms of communication of results and the periodicity of this type of work, these are topics that others have already covered and we'll also go deeper into as we embark further into this work. So I think I'll end here. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. So this brings us to the last part of the annotated outline, which is chapters 8 and 9. Next slide, please. Chapters 8 and 9 and annexes. And chapter 8 is about data compilation and analysis. And we have put this as an overall data compilation and analysis issues. You may note that the chapters 5 and 6 has a section on statistical consideration, and the chapter 7 on human biomonitoring has a section on the data management, analysis, and evaluation. These are the management and analysis of the each media monitoring data. And this chapter is discuss how the overall data may be used to understand the level of mercury and trend in its trend. And chapter 9 is reference. This is quite simple. And Annex 1, standard operating procedure, protocols, and reference materials. And this will be this will list useful existing guidance and guidelines, SOPs are used in different networks. Annex 2 is a review of monitoring networks. There are existing reviews, so we will be able to build on this the past work. So now, before going to the next agenda item, I'd like to open for questions on specific issues. And I like to invite those of you who have some questions to raise your hand. And we already note that there's some questions in the chat box and some responses already. So firstly, I'd like to turn to the panelists. If you have any thoughts, additional thoughts that are not related to the questions raised in the chat box, or any other thoughts. And in the meantime, I'd like to invite the participants to raise your hands if you have comments. I see most of the questions already answered in the chat box, and I had asked TAC to look at the chat box and pick up some issues that have not been responded. But please, TAC, please, if you have anything.
Yes, thank you, Eisaku. In my list, I have 6 attendees raising the hand. So can I?
Okay. Yes,
yeah.
yes, please.
Yes. So I have Miss Susan Kane. So you are unmuted now, please.
Thank you. Thanks for this review. I just wondered if there was also going to be a discussion of sort of the introductory component of the outline, which I actually think is very important for setting up the purpose and objective of the monitoring to feed into the effectiveness evaluation. So, for example, just as a reflection on what we just heard, Linwell emphasized the importance of making sure that there was, the objective of the air monitoring is very globally oriented. Dave further elaborated on that. And then when Neil was speaking, he emphasized both, general population monitoring, but also potentially monitoring of very highly exposed populations, which seems a little different than a global monitoring objective. So I'm not, advocating for one thing or another, but I'm just wondering, is there going to be is it the Secretariat's responsibility to lay out that? Is there going to be some, calling on the scientific experts to really lay out the monitoring objectives, really, and how the monitoring data will fit into different kinds or different dimensions or facets of the effectiveness evaluation? Because I think if you don't have that foundation, it might be difficult for an average person to really understand how all this stuff fits together. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan. I think I'd ask TAC to take 2 or 3 questions and comments, and we will respond after that. So TAC, can you handle the and apologies for the participants. I think I didn't notice the raised hands. I thought that it was sorted, automatically sorted in my screen, but it was not. So I didn't see the hands raised. Sorry about that. And TAC, please name some participants who have raised hands.
Yes. I also have Miss Melanie wishing to take the floor to ask question for Neil Mr. Neil. So,
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Neil. It's Melanie Lemire. I hope you are doing well. I was wondering for the guidelines, can you just explain me the next steps for the biomonitoring aspect? What's the next step of reviewing them? Just to make sure I understand, because I may have some suggestions based on the Nunavik data.
Eisaku, you can correct me if I'm wrong on process, but my understanding is that the three of us as the consultants working with your Secretariat's office will then put together the core of the chapter, which will then be made available to everyone in a few months to further comment and review upon. But Melanie, if there are any specific items that you want to make sure are considered in the human biomonitoring chapter, just feel free to reach out to me.
Well, absolutely. It'll be a pleasure. Just to share is that, for example, in Nunavik, there's a high variation in marine mammal consumption. Throughout the year, for example, they consume more marine mammal in early fall, and this brings a very large variation in mercury exposure within a year. So for, let's say, time trends over several decades, if we don't conduct the biomonitoring studies at the same timing during the year, we may end up to wrong conclusion because we did the mistake to do biomonitoring study in January and the mercury exposure was very low. So I think this aspects of seasonality of local food consumption may be very important for reliable time trends.
Yeah, I think that's a very valuable point, and we'll have to definitely take that into consideration, especially when we spell out ideas for what the survey should be gathering.
Thanks, Neil.
Okay, thank you, Melanie, and thank you, Neil. Next, can I turn to Mr. Semia Garbi? You are unmuted now, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all the panelists. I have 3 points, if you don't mind. So regarding the air emissions. So you know that we have this COVID-19 crisis, and with this crisis, so we were locked down, and the industry activities are decreased, so this will impact the emissions of mercury. So will you integrate this as for example the map during the lockdown, the global lockdown, as emission of mercury? So, and it will be great, that means to integrate such map for mercury emissions as a reference, because we have some decreased industries activities. That's one point. The second point regarding the biota. So for biota, it was mentioned about fresh water and marine water. And you know, we get a lot of discussion within COP for Africa continent about monitoring and analysis of fresh water. So are you expecting to integrate this, the analysis of the monitoring of the fresh water for mercury? And for the third point, it is about human biomonitoring. It will be great. So I represent IPEN, so International Pollutants Network, and we are working on the biomonitoring, the human biomonitoring, since 2013, and we know we have done a lot of projects about human biomonitoring, so we know a lot of things about the ethics. So it will be great. That means if we can support for that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And can I also turn to one more person, Terry Keating? So Terry, please, you are unmuted.
Yes, thank you. This is Terry Keating from the United States. I'd like to go back and highlight Susan's comments that began this discussion. I think that it would be helpful to have a little more discussion about the overall objectives of what we're trying to do in the guidance document, and for a couple of reasons. One is that there's a real balancing that has to go on between balancing the global concerns of the effectiveness evaluation and with informing efforts that are really going to be driven by investments at the national level. And so countries may have very different objectives than what the global effectiveness evaluation would necessarily want to see. And that really needs to be addressed, because I think what we're counting on is countries to invest in the monitoring programs, and they're going to have to see the value for them in those investments. And we have to balance that with what's needed for an overall effectiveness evaluation. Second, the effectiveness evaluation to really look at effectiveness eventually needs to be able to attribute change over time to the measures in the convention. And that's quite a different objective than looking at what the current spatial distribution of exposure is, what current levels are. And so we need to be thinking about that in the way that we design our work, because those are two kind of different monitoring or observational objectives of trying to understand what the current distribution is. And granted, if with multiple rounds of effectiveness evaluations, we'll get different shots at that over time and then be able to look at change. But we also might want to specifically be designing monitoring to look at change over time. And that might require a different set of choices. And third is, I hear from the different consultants working on different chapters, sort of different approaches to filling the overall needs. And one of the things that we are starting with is there are a lot of activities that exist, and we can get a picture of that. What I'm worried about is whether what we're trying to do here is to create a proposal for, in some ways, and I'm going to pick on Dave Evers, basically the frameworks that you outline is a great way if you're starting to design a global program that you want to highlight and get funding for, to fill in regional gaps. That's quite different from taking what we already have and trying to make that as comparable as possible and identifying gaps that we can move forward with. And so I think that we have to look at those objectives of first, the expert group did a great job of already looking at some of what we already have, but that has to be clearly articulated in this guidance of how we take things that we already have and feed those into informing the convention in terms of monitoring programs that are already ongoing. And then we need to also identify where the gaps and priorities are for additional investment. And then we have to motivate that investment, explaining what needs those things are going to what needs those are going to meet and what information that's going to provide. I'll stop there.
Yes, thank you, Terry. Eisaku, I would like to turn over to Eisaku and the panels about the the big picture of this intersessional work, and also related to the question from Susan, and might be related to the question from Kafka in the chat box, the overall aim of this work and developing the guidance, and about the roadmap for us. So, Eisaku, would you like to intervene?
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Tak. And thank you for this discussion. It seems that we have already discussing the issues that we wanted to discuss at the next agenda item, and I'm glad that this already started. So I think some experts wish to say some provide some thoughts on this, and I note that the some parties and stakeholders already provided these views in the commenting round on the uh, the annotated outline. So of course, one simple response is that this is about the use of monitoring data at a the evaluation of the effectiveness, overall effectiveness at a global level. But as noted by some experts already, there should be some balance. And I'd like to remind you that there is one unfinished task on the annotated outline, which is that the Secretariat was supposed to finalize the annotated outline by the 15th of August, taking into account the comments received and convening informal consultations as necessary. And we haven't been able to do that, as I said, partly because if you look at the comments on the annotated outlines, there we have received comments on the general part, chapters 3 and 4, or from a number of countries, Canada, Norway, Japan, US, and Zero Mercury Working Group. And perhaps what we needed, what the Secretariat was expected to do was to consult with these parties and stakeholders who submitted comments and arrive at some common narrative to explain the scope of this document. And this is the task as designed to be done by the Secretariat in consultation with some parties and stakeholders, and not exactly the task of this drafting work. This drafting task is a scientific process. As consultants and secretariats are expected to develop a scientifically sound guidance that will help the COP to design the effectiveness evaluation arrangements. So I think we will need to discuss this at the next agenda item and arrive at some good way to move forward. For example, for the Secretariat to continue to have some informal consultation with parties and stakeholders, and come up with some narrative. But I think before doing that, I see some hands raised, and perhaps some of these some of you who has raised hand may wish to speak to this issue. So I will stop now without turning to the individual experts and hand it back to TAC to allow some other participants to speak. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much, Eisaku. So next on my list, I have Mr. Joel Ormala, and also in my list, I have Miss Caroline Vickers, Miss Manuel Ramirez, and Mr. Nicola Pilon. So Mr. Joel, please. You are unmuted.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Excellent. So a couple of comments to continue on the discussion we just had and continue on Melanie's, Terry's, and Eisaku's comments. I think one of the challenges currently is that we don't exactly know what will happen and how we will work during the next couple of months. As Terry highlighted and Susan as well, we all have a number of comments for different sections in the guideline, and it would be helpful for us to know when is the right time to address them. And to sort of continue on what Terry said and Susan said, that we need to have a discussion on what we mean with comparable monitoring data. Where will we use it? For what purposes? We have the convention text that highlights that we need to collect it. We have a current description of the indicator for Article 1 that says one thing, and we have policy question 3 that comes out from the expert group. And we need to have a discussion on how we have a tiered approach or which of these definitions that we target primarily when we are trying to figure out the other elements that we need to compile those comparable monitoring guidelines. And in order to do that, I would suggest that if the Secretariat could highlight a little bit further how we're going to work during the next months, so that we don't need to tackle every question now. We can have a discussion on how we proceed, perhaps the introduction, our approach, and we'll see how far we get. And then we know that we can tackle questions related to QA procedures, etc., not to mention institutional arrangements later on. And that's really my final comment, that while I see an interest in discussing institutional arrangements and while we certainly need to look at the initiatives that currently exist, we would like to highlight the fact that this is a scientific process which is not supposed to make decisions on institutional arrangements per se, and that decision should be left for the COP. So I would hope a bit of clarification on which questions we will discuss at what point, how we are approaching this process, and then a confirmation that we are leaving out any decisions on institutional arrangements for the COP. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you, Joel. So, Eisaku, would you like to respond to Joel?
Well, one simple response is that we are we would like to hear a bit of discussions on the issues or questions, comments that the experts have, and then we like to sort out which questions will be dealt with in kind of for example in thematic call on chapters 3 and 4 and so on and so forth. So I will take a bit more comments.
Okay, thank you very much. So next, can I turn over to Miss Caroline Vickers, please? You are unmuted.
Yes, thank you very much. My question relates to the sequencing of the work and avoiding duplication of work done. So there's been 2 cycles of work by the expert group. And we should take care not to go back to square one and to build on the information that came out of that exercise as it's useful. And we understand that the parties will be deciding on the indicators. So we do have a table in the COP decision, which is the indicators that were proposed to date. And my question is it the task of this group to describe how the data would be collected for those indicators? And then in the other task that's running in parallel, if the parties request and it's agreed at COP4 to change the indicators, then the guidance would be amended. The reason I ask this question is that I'm a little bit worried that we're starting a third parallel track, which is to start again from the very beginning. So it would be great to clarify that so that WHO will know how we can best input to the process. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. So that was the question on the procedure to collect data for indicators. And while I turn over to the panelists, I would like to turn to two more attendees. Miss Manuel Ramirez, please.
Can you hear me?
Mr. Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Manuel Gabriel Velasquez Ramirez. I'm from Peru. I'm part of the focal point of Peru. I want to introduce a new point to this important guideline. I think that we want to propose the inclusion of new section like other environmental compartments monitoring, because it gives the chance to include other environmental compartments monitoring that belongs to regional conditions. For example, in my region, Latin American region, we deal with a critical social environmental crisis related to the alluvial gold mining, which is one of the main drivers of deforestation and mercury pollution here. And according to some regional results, soils and sediments were the main environmental compartments to assess the environmental quality in these degraded areas. I know that this guide needs to be globally used, right? But I think that this guide can call certain points of environmental compartments in order to be useful for regional conditions. And I would like to introduce a small part of soil and sediments in order to be useful for other countries. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And can I now turn over to Mr. Nicola Pilon? Nicola, you are muted now.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay, that's a good afternoon to everyone. Yeah, I just want to follow up to what Terry Keating already highlighted and few other colleagues. Considering that we are discussing guideline, which is fine, and indicators, which is fine, but we should make clear the spirit of this work that we have had. So all countries are putting efforts on monitoring and not only monitoring. And we should avoid duplication of efforts, and that very often see the participation and contribution from different countries. I already sent a short note regarding in the overall chat today regarding the Group on Earth Observation effort. That is an intergovernmental program that sees all nations contributing, including all nations that have already ratified the Minamata Convention. And in the framework of the flagship that was started a couple of years ago, and we have a kickoff meeting in October, a lot of work has been done in terms of data sharing, because when we talk about effectiveness, as we know, to understand the cycle of mercury and the dynamic of these contaminants, you don't need only mercury data. You need a lot of other data that not necessarily are produced by people measuring mercury. So I'm referring to existing programs collecting a large volume of data in addition to mercury. So the GEO effort is really to provide an input to make available this data without moving data around. You know, I heard about a repository of data. Usually this type of approach has been is part of the past, because nobody moves data around. You have access data, you have metadata description, and then also we should avoid duplication of other initiatives that would start from scratch. Like I don't know, I heard from David. We spoke few times about the UNEP STAP initiative, and I am aware of this, but as already highlighted in a past discussion, we should avoid the duplication of generating new platform, gathering data, putting in new tools, web services, because all this has been done already from in different initiatives, and especially for geo. So we should leverage the effort of the Minamata Convention Secretariat, bringing in all the state-of-the-art that has been produced already, and with the effort of many countries, and mobilizing human resources and the financial resources. So this would avoid to start from scratch again from the prehistory. So that's what I really would like to highlight. We have this kickoff meeting workshop in October to really to start to provide an overview of existing monitoring capability and modeling capability, and also web services capability. So I think the Minamata should take advantage of this, considering that also GEO is a public program, intergovernmental program using public money. So we should make it sure that all public money, public funding should be correctly used and made available to all policymakers as appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicola. So now in my note, I have mainly 4 questions from the attendees. So may I just sort those out? So one question is from Semia about the effects, the effect of the COVID-19 lockdown to air monitoring, and also another question from Semia and also from Manuel on biota monitoring. So this is about freshwater monitoring and also about soil monitoring. And the third question is from Caroline Vickers about indicators. And the fourth comment was from Nicola on how to utilize the existing resources for our monitoring procedure. So may I first turn to Claudia to respond to the question from Caroline about the indicators. Claudia, please.
Thank you very much, Tak. You're doing this really well. Caroline, thank you for raising this question, because I think it's central to the work around indicators. And in fact, we have spent a lot of time internally as a secretariat trying to think of the best ways to help parties in the convention to really square this question you've pointed out. In some ways, very importantly, we do not want to open any third or second track or anything at all. And that's a lot also why, or that's primarily why Eisaku, who leads on monitoring guidance, and I, who lead on indicators, are constantly sort of in each other's webinars, in each other's work, to ensure that these two streams go together and are not separate or are not disconnected from each other in any way. Just to really underline that point, that this we see as very important to keep very close together. But now, trying to unpack and trying to answer your question more deeply, you are right in saying that at the end, it is parties that will agree on their indicators, or the indicators that they will look to for the effective evaluation of the Minamata Convention. But since this is a science-based convention, and all environmental conventions are, the scientific voice and scientific eye to it is very, very important. And indeed, in this group here, with the experts here, not only the consultant experts, but all of you that are nominated through your different channels, you are part of informing, shaping the considerations of what is required indicator-wise from a scientific and evidence-based perspective going forward. I also just want to make a point that we will be making on Thursday, which is that indicators are not the alpha and omega of anything. They are just exactly what they are. They are indicators on a pathway to something. The entire Minamata Convention, as like other conventions, is essentially a mission to change something. In our case, it is to reduce the negative impact of anthropogenic mercury on the environment and on health, as you very well know, and you very well support us through the WHO. And so indicators are pathways or spots or landings on that pathway. And as was also pointed out earlier, I think it was by Terry, that of course we are looking at all of this and even the work on this very specific guidance monitoring, because we want to look at change and want to help you as parties understand the change that you seek to do through the measures that you've signed up for and shaped in the Minamata Convention. I realized, Caroline, I'm not answering the question very directly because it is a little bit of a dance between these two sets of eyes, if I may say so. But I do see, and we do see, that many of the experts that are in today's meeting and are supporting here are also very closely following the indicator process, or with their colleagues are doing so. So we hope to have this yin and yang come forward together. But the more the scientific voice can give the information that is required for the policy makers, and science and policy are very closely related, we believe the better the plateau will be for parties to make their decisions on indicators, and for all of the stakeholders as well to be able to contribute to the implementation of our convention. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. And if I may jump in, and I like to try to respond to other comments. And thank you, Tak, for summarizing the comment. That's very helpful. I think it's easier to start. Well, the easiest thing is about COVID, and I think that's a very interesting topic. I'm not sure whether it is related, directly related to the effectiveness evaluation, but as a scientific activity of the Secretariat, we will try to look into the different monitoring data and try to see whether there's something we can learn from, and if something happens, then if we find something, we can report, inform the COP. So I think I will address the issues of freshwater, soil, and sediment. And thank you, Peru, for raising this question. And I haven't read the comments that we received from Peru today. And that is one thing we were wondering, whether any other parties and stakeholders have any important comments on the annotated outline before we finalize the outline. So it is very good to see. My recollection in the of the COP decision is that since Biota monitoring addresses continental framework and the oceanic framework, and the some biota species are addressed in continental framework, including the effects of the ASGM, as Dave mentioned. It may be a feasible approach to take into account the information on water and biota in the assessment of the biota monitoring data. But I don't think there's a clear agreement at the COP or the expert group on the inclusion of water and sediment. So this is how we describe it is something that we will need to clarify when we finalize the annotated outline. So and in response to other questions on the process, I think we will we propose something at the end of this meeting. But perhaps one thing is that since the Secretariat was supposed to finalize the annotated outline after 2 weeks after closing the comments, I think we may try to come up with a kind of final narrative by the end of this month, for example, in consultation with some parties and stakeholders who submitted comments. And then we may start with a series of thematic online meetings, perhaps starting with the chapters 3 and 4, and then chapter 5 and 6 and 7 and perhaps 8, things like that. So that may happen after October, and the draft needs to be finalized by sometime July, January next year. So this is some tentative idea, and I would like to we would like to consider that after hearing more discussion during the rest of this meeting. And in response to Nicola's comment, yes, we very much look forward to the current initiatives from GOS4M and also from STAP, Jeff STAP initiative. And I think COP will welcome any contribution that these initiatives can make. So at the same time, in this process, we would appreciate the technical input from these initiatives. So perhaps this is my summary of the agenda item 3, I think, and no, agenda item 2, I think. And we have only 20 minutes, and we like to go into the agenda item 3, background information and elements of guidance. And this, as I said, this session is expected to be a interactive one. I'm not going to the presentation because okay, I will do run the presentation very quickly. Next slide, please. So basically what I wanted to say was that we received comments from Canada, Colombia, India, Japan, Norway, United States, and Zero Mercury Working Group, and from Peru today. And these are available on the online workspace. So some of the questions can be taken into account when we develop the draft, and some of the comments will relate to the structure of the annotated outline. So we will pick up those the latter comments and try to work on the annotated outline as quickly as possible. So this this group of experts, or the experts identified by the parties and stakeholders, are supposed to contribute to the drafting of the guidance, i.e., providing elements of the guidelines. So this is not a place for discussing or agreeing on the structure of the outline, but if any of you have any knowledge about parties and stakeholders potentially having additional views on the annotated outline, we will need to hear about us as soon as possible, because we have to work on it soon. The next slide, please. This is about the guidance used in existing monitoring programs and networks. And in the online workspace, we have collected existing guidelines in these monitoring programs and networks. And additionally, in some comments on the annotated outlines, we received some good suggestion about the materials that are already available on the web. So I think we can add these new materials here. So one thing I would like to wanted to mention is that we would like to invite all of you to provide information on the existing monitoring guidelines and guidance in programs, monitoring programs and networks. So I think this is my last slide. So I like to open the floor for discussion. I think we already had a very good discussion at the last agenda item, and my thought was that I will divide the discussion into 4 parts. One, the general comments discussion, and then air, biota, and biomonitoring. But I don't think we have time for that. We only have 15 minutes left. So I think I will open the floor for comments, questions on the elements of the monitoring guidance. And I would turn to, and I see hand from Caroline and Terry. I'm not sure whether they forgot to lower their hands or still have hands up, but I will. Terry's hand is down. So, Caroline, do you have any additional thoughts?
Thanks, Eisaku. I put something in the chat box. I tried to take my hand down after my last comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So then the floor is open, and I will turn to TAC if you see any substantive points you find in the chat box.
Yes, thank you, Eisaku. Now I don't see any hands up yet, and I'm still waiting for some comments in the chat box. While we wait, can I turn over to Claudia to respond to what Caroline has commented? So Claudia, please.
Thank you very much, Tak, and also thank you, Caroline, for the question and clarifying this part. In other words, just for the sake of everybody, Caroline said, my question was whether the group is stepping off from the COP decision and the table therein, or going back over the work of the expert group. And just to add a bit of context, but I absolutely invite you to join us on Thursday for our sessions there. The COP decision requests that parties submit their views on the table that is attached to the COP decision. That table is 60-odd indicators, 57 in particular, specifically in that annex. It was projected earlier, and if you would like to be able to find it easily, it is all linked in on our website on the intersessional process, but otherwise it is also in our COP report, which is part of all the documentation. It's the first one on COP3. But just to be very specific, in Annex 1, it's a very lengthy table, there are 58, actually 58 indicators. And if one reads those indicators, are indicators that are proposed and are to be commented on by parties. Those indicators was the outcome of the discussions COP had on the indicators that were initially put forward by the expert group. In other words, the expert group indicators were maybe a bit more or a little bit different, but it's not a huge change from before, but the changes were deemed important by the parties. And so it is the actual decision annex that is the stepping off point for consideration. I do, though, want to also point out that in there is reference made that there were also, because there are 3 types of indicators that had been named, so to speak, although they, this is a particular nomenclature. The one is process indicators, the other is outcome indicators, and then there were some monitoring indicators. Either way, they are all indicators of some type. And in the annex, there's also a reference to the table that was in document 310 that actually went to the COP. In other words, the report by the group, and that included 7 more monitoring indicators organized by media. So in short, it's 60 odd, it's 65 indicators altogether that are in front of parties and stakeholders to look at. Having said that, if science shows that something has been forgotten or something has not been taken care of or something somehow needs to be added, I do not believe the decision says it cannot be added. That is for the parties to be deciding on. So if there's something, whether it's in the expert report or elsewhere, that needs to be added, I do not see it in the language of decision to prevent that. But this is going to be communicated to us by parties. I'd also want to just say that, and you will hear more on that on Thursday, that it's not only maybe in this long list of indicators a matter of should the indicator be there or not, although there could be views on that, but also to sharpen some of the indicators. I cannot comment directly now, maybe Eisaku knows more, but maybe this is more so the work that will be forthcoming, whether that refers to the quote-unquote monitoring indicators, but in some of the process indicators, for example, here and there, it could be neatened up, sharpened, and really, the logic can be strengthened for it really to be an indicator that will help in the overall end. I hope that goes some way to square this circle. Thank you, Tux. Thank you, Eisaku.
Yes, thank you, Claudia. And I also want to ask Eisaku or other panels that they would want to add something. And can I also turn over to Eisaku of a quick question from Bill in the chat box, asking about where he should submit additional comments on this issue.
Thank you, Tak. And since we have only 10 minutes, I think I will respond to that question while doing the item 4, which is about the the next steps. And next slide is there's no substance in this slide, but the what roadmap says is that the secretariats and consultants will work on the draft between September and December. Through thematic online meetings and maybe thematic face-to-face meeting, which may be a bit difficult under this circumstance. So we will work through thematic online meetings. And as I said, one possible way is to start with the thematic meeting on chapter 3 and 4, and then chapter 5, 6, and 7, and then 8. And as we looked at the comments already received and also the discussion we had under chapters 3 and 4, we have some issues around, for example, the monitoring strategy, how the gap should be closed, and also the issue of the monitoring media. So I think these issues will need to be addressed before doing this thematic call. And then I think we can we will discuss with the consultants on the best timing for the individual calls on chapter 5, 6, and 7. And chapter 8, I think we have some substantive issues on the attribution and modeling and so on, which will need to be handled before this thematic meeting. So I would propose that we will, the Secretariat will aim at finalizing the annotated outline as early as possible, aiming at the end of this month. But I think it may be a bit challenging because of the because we have quite substantive comments, but we can aim at that. And I propose that we after October we organize online thematic meetings. So as I said, we have received comments from several parties, and we thought that we can work on these based on these comments, because we have invited parties and stakeholders to comment by the end of July already. But I think this discussion may have stimulated you some thoughts. So I think we can wait. We can have kind of one week to perhaps by the 22nd of September for additional comments on the annotated outline, and we will start working on that. And the comments should be sent to the Secretariat email address. I will communicate to you all about the next steps. So this is my summary of the discussion, and I'd like to open for questions. And after that, I would like to invite 3 consultants to provide some closing remarks. But the floor is open.
Thanks, Eisaku. I see no hands right now, but I do see one comment from Mikola that's related to the last agenda item about AMAP not listed in the existing networks. So maybe you would want to respond to that one.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I contacted the AMAP, and what we learned was that they were using some. My memories is that I was informed that they were using this EMAP methods and so on, and perhaps their scientific efforts are not so much based on the kind of uniform guidance, but the AMAP work is a kind of building on the scientific research on on mercury and other substances in the Arctic. But I would appreciate any information about the guidelines used in the AMAP, and of course we acknowledge AMAP as a very well established network. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Eisaku. I think Mikala wishes to take the floor. So can I?
Yes.
Yes, can you hear me, please?
Yes, very well.
Yeah, Eisaku, I'd just like to inform you that the AMAP monitoring on air is more or less the same as the EMAP monitoring, but we have a lot of experience in monitoring in biota and in human biomonitoring. So definitely we have very well developed guidelines, and I think you should include us on this list for existing monitoring programs. And we will be happy to provide further information on this and cooperate with you on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikala. That will be helpful. So perhaps we don't have any remaining hand?
No, I don't see any hands.
Okay. So then may I turn to the panelists, Will, Dave, and Neil, to provide any closing remark. Will?
Linwell, you want to go first?
Oh, yeah, okay, Dave. Yeah, okay.
Dave, thank you, Eisaku. Yeah, I just a couple comments, a couple thoughts. So one regarding the question about using water as a matrix for monitoring. There's a lot of information in the United States that for a couple decades there was the development of a wildlife criteria value that was based on total mercury in the water or methyl mercury in the water. Those models and relationships have been developed and are there as an approach. And that can be included in the Biota mercury monitoring report. So there's value there, but I will just say, and it can be outlined in the report, that to make those relationships, the sampling of water needs to be very specific and designed for relating to biota. And it's very challenging, is not cost effective, is very hard to replicate. But there are approaches that can be used, that can be spelled out. So maybe that will help answer that question a little bit better. Also, I'll just mention there was a question about identifying bioindicators that can relate to loss of biodiversity from mercury contamination. That's challenging to do. The scientific literature does not have a lot of information on that topic, but I think it is a topic that is well worth pursuing and investigating, and I would welcome any sort of feedback for that interest and need. Thanks.
So maybe I'll go next. Neil Basu for the human biomonitoring work. There were a number of bits of information people shared with me, much appreciated. Feel free to contact me one-on-one if you want to discuss further or go through the Secretariat's office. I feel from this meeting that there are some more structural and macro elements related to chapters 3 and 4, which we need to come to some consensus on, because these will then define what chapter 7 human biomonitoring will be like. The other thing we should always continue to be reminded on is that a lot of the resources and expertise we have for human biomonitoring comes out of our experiences in resource intensive high income settings, and we should keep on thinking about how this would play out in much of the world which is resource limited.
Thank you, Neil. Can I turn to Will? Oh, can you unmute yourself? I think there's a bit of connection problem, since we don't hear or we don't see him. So perhaps if he has any messages, we can include that in my message to email message to the participants.
Yes, Eisaku, Will
yes.
was mentioning about some connection issues, so I will check with him in the while you proceeding.
Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We are already 4 o'clock in Geneva time, so it is time to close. This is was a very enlightening interaction of thoughts and views and information, and quite honestly, we need to discuss further discuss within the Secretariat and with the consultants about the exact timeline, exact way forward. But I think I outlined the way forward, the finalization of the annotated outline, and then thematic calls starting with chapters 3 and 4. So we will try. We will come up with a more detailed timeline and come back to you. So thank you very much, and I look forward to working with all of you through the thematic meetings. Thank you very much. And can we unmute all, or is it possible?
Yes, I can do that. Yes.
Okay. So I'm muting all, and if any of you who were not able to put your comments in the chat or raise hand, please shout. No, it's a. Oh yeah.
It's muted now.
Muted.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Bye.